Startup Mindsets, happy June. This is a special episode today. We are talking to Chris Heivly, one of the founders of Mapquest, as well as a really successful entrepreneur and getting Mapquest to sell to AOL for $1 billion, I think. And he has a really great book. It's called Build the Fort. He also has another book, which I don't recall the complete title. It's also titled Build the Fort, but there's a different, different tagline underneath it. He's done TEDx talks. He's really well known in the South for his startup ecosystem building. And today we're just going to talk about what it takes to really build a new community from scratch, whether you're an entrepreneur or an investor. So Chris, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. It's nice to meet you as well.
Dan, it's my pleasure. I can't wait to share some stories and do some chuckling and
Yeah,
absolutely go from
absolutely.
there.
Well, Chris, yeah. So I think early in the conversation we were talking about like you're from the South, but then you eventually created I guess like a tech company, right? Which was MapQuest, and this was during the '80s, right? Where this wasn't the thing to do, or like there wasn't the internet to circulate all this information. What do you think? How did that come? Or can we just hear about Chris actually, just from Chris's point
Yeah.
of view, not mine?
Well, I'm originally from the Philadelphia area, so I'm more of a Northeasterner guy. I was not a very good college student. It took me, 5.5 years to get through college and a couple, stops along the way. But like many people, somewhere in early in my college career, I stumbled upon a class that lit me on fire, and it was a computer mapping class. Now, by the way, there's no such thing as desktop computers or iPads or iPhones, right? There weren't even laptops, right?
Yeah.
This is back in big old mainframey kind of days. But it still turned me on. I learned how to write code as became a geography major, learned how to write code. And I set that up to say that, after graduate school in the South, in South Carolina, because that was only one of 3 schools that had we call this GIS today, Dan, a
Oh, right,
geographic
right.
information systems, right? But that didn't even exist. That's how old I am to all you out there listening. But I'm like 60 something going on 12, right? Just let's be clear. I still got the more energy than you all. Uh, but fast forward after a graduate school, a government stop, I get recruited to a mapping company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Now, if you don't know what Lancaster, Pennsylvania is, it's the home to over 50,000 Amish people,
Oh, no
right?
way.
That still drive horse and buggies, to the store and farm. So it's obviously a tech mecca, I say sarcastically. But, we had a bunch of people that just had no fear. We knew more about mapping than anybody else. We had a map services company, and we started dabbling with technology. And fast forward after a couple, desktop CD-ROMs and then the internet in February '96, we just pushed something out that we now called MapQuest. It was not the name of our company at the time. It was a product online.
Sure.
And yeah, it just took off from there. It was crazy. 1996.
Did you when you made MapQuest, did you think like this that it would get to the point that it was a really, huge company or
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, it was just another product in our suite. We made maps by hand for
Oh, right.
people. We made maps on computers. We now had CD-ROM products. We were building mapping software for corporations to use for like travel agents and airlines, and where mapping was a big portion. This was just a kind of an experiment, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah. What would you think it was that you know about MapQuest that really got it to explode, Because I think like a lot around during that time there's like a lot of other tech companies too, like pets.com or like what
Yeah,
were some of the I mean, what were some of the
the
cool ones? Like
OGs.
yeah, the OGs, man.
I mean,
The classics.
yeah, back to the classics. I mean, there's a kind of a business model or a business term that was created back then, which doesn't really exist today, which is called first mover advantage.
Right.
And so when I look back on it, why did we succeed? We had no fear in putting something out there. We had been working over the last 5 to 6 years in creating code that was getting smaller and tighter and faster. And the database is needed to do this. By the way, we did not have to build a database. We licensed it from some of the in-car navigation providers who were still 10 years away from actually putting these in cars like we know it today, but they had the database. So we had no fear in doing that. It didn't matter where we were from. We were the experts. But then, and in that expertise and without fear, we also had the freedom to experiment and to put something out there. And I think we happen to be the first one. There's nothing special we did by today's standards to trick people into doing it. It just was viral from day one.
Yeah. How did MapQuest like make money? Was it through advertising or was it through, people paying to be a premium user at MapQuest, like special directions or
Yeah, no, good question. So it was two pieces: advertising, and then a kind of a more of a B2B piece where companies were calling us saying, we'd like to map enable our sites. So think about Starbucks or Marriott hotels and on and on. And they were like, they were new to the internet. Oh my gosh, we got to do this internet thing. We got to put up a site. But, if I'm like Starbucks, where's the nearest Starbucks? They wanted to be able to ask that question. So what they were asking us to do is to build an interface to their site, geocode all of their locations and have those show up on a map that was just custom to their site. So we were making, but it was primarily advertising and then these kind of like business services. We never charged the user anything ever.
Wow. Yeah, no, I think I did use MapQuest, but I think it was like mid 2000s, right? Like when I was born I was born in 1995, and then like the map stuff like didn't come to my mind until like I needed to go somewhere, which
Right. Why would you
but
knew it? Well, Dan, and like totally to map geek out for a second, there's three questions. What's the
right.
closest? How do I get there? And what else is around me?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you think about it, those are the only three questions, and we've been answering them in different ways. Paper maps prior to that, you had to figure out where the thing was, but it's still pretty simple. So as long as we answer those questions for you when you need it, we're ready.
Were you a big road trip person or a road trip guy?
Yeah, just to some extent. I'm a big map guy, so I love the idea of a road atlas. If you remember sitting in the back of your car with dad and mom going
Yeah.
somewhere, if you think about that, that not only told you how we were getting there, but that told you what was around, right? So like I love that idea. Later on, I was president of Rand McNally, and they were the biggest paper map provider in the world. So we did the road atlases and folded maps and all that kind of stuff.
No way. What do you think it is about geography that you got fascinated enough to combine it with the internet, right? Or like with technology? Because yeah, there's a lot of people who have I'm sure like being in the entrepreneur side, they have I guess like a deep fascination with something, but when it comes time to combine it with a product or like a service, no, it doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
scale, right?
Right. I mean, and when you're super geek about something, you either think that everyone has the same geekness or nobody has the same geekness, I think, right? But I knew that people were using paper maps every day. I just thought that there might be a better way to deliver that, right? And what I loved about, so why, I don't know what's in me, but my brain is wired to love what we call spatial, like I have a spatial brain. I want to know where I am compared to other people. Like if you fly into New York, right? Have you been to New York?
Never. Sorry.
Okay. So
I
it's
will
all
go
right.
there though.
So you'll go there someday. You'll fly into LaGuardia, right? It's 7 million population, all crunched on an island. You'll fly into LaGuardia. You'll probably grab an Uber to take you to someplace into Manhattan, and you'll have no idea where you are. Like that would make me uncomfortable until I finally figured out and had a mental map of how New York operated, because I was totally not in any control of where I was, right? So I see that if I wasn't a cartographer, I would have been an architect, right? I love how kind of I want to know where I am in space. That's the way I'm wired.
Wow, yeah. So back in the day, like, yeah, people would just use physical maps, right? And just that would
Yeah.
cut it, all be lost together.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd reach into your car and or you stop at the gas station and buy a paper map,
The
or
map
or
cut, right?
or ask someone. Right?
The good old days, yeah, where
Yeah.
people had to help each other. Well, does MapQuest? It's also like in other countries too, right? Like in, you know,
Yes. Yeah, it was
did
worldwide.
um for you, Chris, like getting the company, like I guess like operating a company, like getting employees and venture money and I'm sure like just growing the business revenue. Did you you had that passion, right, for just making maps, but when it came to like selling the ads or just service for Starbucks or the hotel chains, did you find that the business activities um were not necessarily what you were passionate about, or was it also that you were passionate about both of those at the same time?
Uh, well, I have different answers. I have different answers then, and I have different answers now.
Uh-huh.
And it evolved over time. You know, what I'll tell you, I'll give you the full arc. The arc today is I'm not that interested in scaling businesses. I really love the 0 to 1.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the blank sheet of paper, but it's taken me, that's only been kind of 10 to maybe 15, maybe 10 to 13 years that I finally realized I don't enjoy having 300 people, all the different aspects of the business. I mean, I don't want to say it was like zero. It's just, it was more like a 60 or a 70 in the how the feel good meter, right? That ran to 100. Um, and I found out maybe I'm not even like that good at it. Like I think I'm okay with it. What I really like is figuring something out, with a small group of people. So um, we definitely handed over the reins to MapQuest, pretty early on. And we had a good team of people, but we brought in a new CEO right before we took it public. And I left the board and left the company because they needed adults, right? They needed people that, knew how to take a company public and, could be public figures. And I was 35 or something, right? So,
Yeah.
that's just the arc, so I don't know. I haven't had the biggest thing I've ever really run was probably something that was around 20 to 25 million in revenue, 300 people. That's where I kind of hit my kind of like, all right, this is not that much fun anymore. I'm gonna go back to 0 to 1.
Yeah, yeah, there's definitely like the day, like, well, I would even say like the different times like where you're having fun, and then like there's like this big business need that is
Yeah.
approaching, or like somebody's mad at you because you didn't pay them or something else has happened.
Yeah. Or, you got, a customer or a partner and you got to figure that out. And then you got, and now you're not just kind of working in a team of 5 to 8, you
Yeah.
got 300 people, you're working with 5 to 8, they're responsible for 300. You got to make sure the vision's being kind of, you know, communicated effectively. You're making these big decisions. I'm not afraid of any of those things. And I enjoyed some of that, but collectively, it's a different brain. It's a different brain than the 0 to 1 brain.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely like I'd say like a manager's top down type of like, you're running things, right? Like
Yeah,
where it's like
exactly.
you're not tinkering on innovation as much. But
Yeah.
for you, was it hard to make that stuff like from the innovation perspective, like coding and getting all that data? Like I guess like there was a team, right? But like you loved it.
I loved it. And that's really where my personal like, and as you get older, I think we all start to if by the way, the sooner you can do this, the better. To like know who you are and know what you want, not just have it all. Like what I'm good is like when there's a blank sheet of paper and whether it's just me or me and a few other people or me and a handful of people of all different perspectives, figuring out how to kind of bring that all together to kind of figure out what a customer wants, right? Do customer discovery, all these things we know about today. That's what I'm really good at. And not that I have to write the code or write the marketing or write the sales script or make the calls. Yeah, you do probably a little bit of all of that, but I really like bringing people together to make something massive happen.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm guessing like to foray into your new career like as an author, right? Like or just your hobby career, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's called Build the Fort, and it talks about startup ecosystems in not so popular places. Like, well, for me, I've always lived in California, and I've seen like the tech the new tech boom from the, I guess, mid 2010s to 2020,
Mhm.
uh, seeing like companies like the ones like that are Uber or Airbnb become so huge, and just thinking about that. But Silicon Valley had that what do you call that um, I would say like that nest of people who've done it before. For
Yes.
you in North Carolina or wherever it may have been in your experience, do you find that you want to galvanize those communities or just create those communities because entrepreneurship is a force for good and just changes the world?
Couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, yeah. I mean, even let's go back even smaller than a force for good and good for, the world. How about just good for you? I think there's somewhere, who knows what the number is, but I'm thinking 5 to 10% of any given population are entrepreneurs. Now, that could be, running a restaurant or, being a solo marketing, czar, or it could be building the next big high tech, high growth Mapquest, right? Um, Throwing that all together, I think there's a healthy portion, let's just call it 5 or 10%. But if you look around any one population, there's not 5%, 5 to 10% of those people who actually are doing it. Why is that?
Hmm.
And so from stage, I'll frequently say, like, raise your hand if you had a business idea that you're really passionate about. And 98% of hands go up, right? You'd imagine that, right? You're not surprised by that. However, when I say keep your hand up if you've actually taken the first step on that idea, and 98% of the hands go down. That's the thing that I care about the last 10 or so years is empowering the community so that if you're that person who has an idea, you understand where their community is, where I can get knowledge, where I can get access to thoughts and people and capital and all the things. And you could start to kind of test out that thing and say, hey, maybe it's my turn, right? And if you look at high tech, high growth businesses, that was primarily Silicon Valley, maybe later on Boston, or maybe at the same time, New York, Seattle, now Austin, Texas.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Right. But I believe this can happen in just about any city that's probably at least 250,000 people and above. And if you're not doing that, I feel bad for your city because if you don't have this healthy, robust kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem, then you're going to have people leave because 10% of those people, and
Yeah,
maybe
that's
it's
true.
growing, who knows, if they don't see it or feel constrained that their city doesn't offer, and not that it's not the city's responsibility, but the city as a whole doesn't have that environment, then you're going to go elsewhere. Right. And maybe you're going to and you don't have to go to Valley or New York like when I was young. Now you can go to Austin or Raleigh Durham or even Atlanta and Chicago and Dallas and
Yeah, yeah.
Nashville, right? And you can you can, learn how to become an entrepreneur, get in that entrepreneurial tribe and kind of, stretch your wings a little bit. And that's what I've wanted. That's why I wrote the book, right? I want to empower every one of those cities and the people in it to say, I can do it here. How do I do it?
Yeah, no, that's quite a brilliant point. Just I think like you only see like where it's been successful or like people only really care, that's what matters to them. But the fact that it can be anywhere, especially the remote work life or just, that past 3 years of change, there's that ability to, there's teams with employees all over the country. They don't have an office in it. So from your end, Chris, like I guess like what you see right now, have you seen that change take place, or how have you seen that work in your research or your life?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely happening and it's happening faster and bigger. I think COVID really accelerated it. And you mentioned it with kind of the remote and
Yeah,
the fact that you can work for Google in San Francisco, but live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right?
that's
And
crazy, right?
so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, it was kind of like that happened by exception. Now it's like, yeah, we figured out how that's not so bad. It can work. So why not? Um, you know, it's kind of I'm stealing this from others who are smarter than me, but it's like a democratization of entrepreneurship. It's a democratization of capital. You don't have to go to these places, right? It's not like your parents where you worked for one place or lived in one place. If I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I have to live in Silicon Valley. Like Obviously, you don't have to do that anymore, right? So, um, I look at, I've been about 17 years in Raleigh, Durham. It's still kind of a two city southern kind of place, but it's over 2 million, soon to be 3 million, huge amount of in-migration. We have the Research Triangle, which has been there for 50 years. That was created, specifically for technology-based companies, IBM, GSK, NetApp, on and on, to kind of set up, a second or third, office. We have three big universities in Duke, UNC Chapel Hill, and NC State, and a bunch of, very good, smaller colleges. Huge amount of in-migration because of weather, right? We
Yeah.
got all these ingredients, right? It's not New York or Philly or Boston, and it's not as hot as Atlanta or Miami. So it's got all of these good qualities. Why wouldn't this be able to happen here? So that's what I've been involved in for about 13 years, and where I've kind of cut my teeth on community building. I will add, Dan, that from 2016 through about 2020, I work with Techstars, which is one of the bigger kind of organizations that help
Oh,
entrepreneurs
right.
succeed all over the world. And we built a consulting company. So not only did I do this for Raleigh Durham, but I took those lessons and their lessons, we combined them together. And I did this in about 15 cities, Taipei, Taiwan, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Lima, Peru, Cleveland, Ohio. And so, the book is kind of the accumulation of all those experiences that
Oh,
says,
wow.
like, all these different places, there's some commonalities, and here's the same problems, here's the same challenges, but here's here's a mindset and set of activities you can do that will help you move your place forward, regardless of whether you're just starting out, whether you're, kind of just growing your startup community, or whether you're kind of peaking.
Have you noticed, Chris, like there's like a different, I guess, like from the entrepreneur's perspective, that you've seen that founders in, I guess, non-Silicon Valley or non-West Coast, like non-California, they don't care about fundraising as much, or you know what I mean? Like, is there a different, um, I wouldn't say attitude, but right, like, different,
Yeah.
they care about different things just better, or it doesn't matter to them as much, or
Well,
they're not capitalistic, or
no, you're partially right, but what it is it's not that they don't care. It's just that there isn't a lot of capital in these
oh, okay.
places, so they can't care that much about it. For them to grow the businesses, many of them build like a services component into their business model, so they can survive in the early years, where they get paid, right,
Hmm, hmm.
by a client, as opposed to maybe going with some other type of business model that would be funded by raising capital. It's changing, and it gets a little bit better in most places every day. But for most of the last 20 years, the capital was primarily in New York, Boston, and the Valley on the coast. And so if you were not on the coast, you either had to figure out how to get money from the coast, which is really hard,
Hmm.
or build different business models. So it's not that they don't care, it's just that they didn't have access to.
Do you think, like, back in the day, like, uh the guy who made Uber, he's no, I don't know their histories. Well, I know Airbnb, the guy who made Airbnb is from Rhode Island, right? And I guess Brian and his friends, they came to San Francisco one day and they realized that whole thing could work. But
Right.
um I think, like, the idea is, like, do you think the investors, like, if you don't meet them in person back in the couple years back, that they wouldn't want to give you millions of bucks, right? Like, was that also your experience too? Like, or they didn't have as
Completely.
much in your day as it's a phone?
Yeah, I mean, let's break it down. Fundraising is solely about credibility, right? So if I come out there post Mapquest and I say, listen, I need to raise some money West Coast, and I'm going to put this in Topeka, Kansas, I could probably raise money because I got Mapquest behind me, right? And I
Hmm.
can, so I have credibility. If I'm first time pitching Mapquest out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we better have something really, really, really special in order. And by the way, we did get West Coast and Boston money early in MapQuest, right? And so, but we already had an existing business, and we had existing credibility, and we were the only ones talking map tech at the time, right? So we were very unique. Those things don't exist as much anymore. But the other thing I'll overlay on that is that typically, when you're raising your first funds, 50, 100, maybe a couple $100,000, almost always that money is local. It has to start local. So locals have to be your first money in. So the question is, if those locals aren't set up to write those kinds of checks,
Right.
then you're going to get up and move, or you're going to try to find a different business model. This is the beauty of the Valley and New York and Boston and Austin, is that they've been doing it this way for more than 20 years. They have the infrastructure, the angels, VCs, right? Other executives that have been through this, people that have experiences that could share mentorship with you and help you make better. So those things are just much more mature, and all of those things, and smaller places that are more emerging are not mature. And so that's the issue that's confronting. But again, it improves on those places. Like every day it gets a little bit better, right?
Right. Yeah. What do you think, like maybe fast forward 10 years or something like that into the future? Yeah, I think I definitely see it now. Nobody goes to office in downtown since San Francisco is pretty vacant. I'm not sure about other cities, but do you think that the the market for entrepreneurship is obviously exploding, right? Like whether it's a guy who makes TikToks or whether it's, a YouTube
Yeah.
person, like whether it's uh a e-commerce thing, like it's always growing to my scene. Like what do you think the
Yeah.
future can look like or
Well,
want it to look
let's
like?
let's just start right here. You mentioned you're 27, you're thinking about entrepreneurship, if not doing it. You
Yeah.
have a podcast, right? Like at 27, I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was. Okay. Now we have a bunch of years in between us, but if you just think of that as kind of the storyline or part of the arc, yes, there's much more people who are thinking about what being an entrepreneur is like and whether it's for them and how they might manifest that self. I think that's going to continue. Maybe it's not going to lessen. Maybe it'll continue to increase. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's 10 or 12 or 15%. But more and more of people your age and the next generations are going to take more control of their lives. Whether that means they're going to be an entrepreneur, whether that means they're going to work for IBM, but then live where they want to live, right? These capabilities exist today. So I think what that means to me is that you as an individual have more power over your career and your living place and your arc than maybe we did back when I was a youngster. So with that in mind, more power means more interesting ways of things coming together. And what that means is Nashville, Raleigh, Durham, Wilmington, North Carolina, Charleston, Columbia, South Carolina. I'm just doing the Southeast.
Yeah.
Let's go to San Antonio. Let's go to Topeka. Let's go to Des Moines. Like these places are Birmingham, Alabama. These places are starting to bubble.
Uh-huh.
City government and state governments are figuring out ways to create the environment so that these people can either stay and build their entrepreneurship or come back, right? But come back home after going to Stanford or University of, fill in the state, right?
Yeah, right.
Or if not them, their spouse, right? You're 27, maybe you're not married and popping kids yet, but maybe you will in the next 5 years. And your wife goes, listen, I want to go back to mom and dad in Des Moines. And you're like, that's great because I can do this from anywhere, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden, place becomes a something you
Irrelevant,
can
right?
really relevant and something you can actually factor into your decisions. So fast forward 10 years from now, we now have much more distributed talent, much more distributed entrepreneurship. And then what's going to follow is much more distributed capital, right? Venture capitalists are going to have to learn how to not just do deals in their backyard. I mean, they've already learned this, right?
Right.
But they're going to figure out how to get access to these deals. They're going to have to.
Yeah. I feel like for the fun to, continue, like they can't just be. There was that weird quote or funny quote that was like, I only invest in well, a lot of people say they only invest in companies 30 miles at the house, but they'd
Yeah.
be laughed at right now if that was that was the case, right?
And that's a day, like I know it, I dated, I've lived it, but that's if you're a professional investor, those days are long gone.
Uh-huh. Do you think like COVID really did that, or like do you think like people were just stuck in their ways and they wouldn't accept? Because I think like a lot of people they wanted to do what's currently happening right now, but the geography or like the thinking just wasn't there, and like they get shunned or rejected easily, like quite easier.
I think there's two factors, Dan. And the first one is that if you're in one of these very leading, very mature places, there's so much more capital that you have to compete to get in a deal, right? So you could say, like, I only do deals within 30 miles. That notion was then when you could pick which deals you wanted to go in. But now more and more, there's so much money out there that competitive nature of being an investor in the Valley, New York, means that you actually have to figure out how to find deals elsewhere, right? And plus, those deals become overpriced when they're that competitive for money, right? So you might say, as a venture capitalist, I don't want to, I don't want, you know, I don't want to optimize for 3 to 5x returns. I still have to optimize for 10x returns. I can't get 10x returns based on the terms that I'm coming into this deal. And I may not even get in some of these deals. I better start to expand my geography. And at the same time, entrepreneurs are getting smarter and smarter, better and better in these other places. And they're, you know, this is where COVID may have accelerated things. They can show that, like, listen, where I'm sitting to now has enough infrastructure around me that I can grow the company as far as we can take it here. I don't have to come to the big city, right, to get access to the things I need. Access is a Zoom call away. Right?
For that, yeah. When you in your book, I haven't read it. I got to read it. But in Build the Fort, do you advocate for like communities that do you think like virtual communities is you know worth pursuing, or do you just want to just keep like compare and contrast like being in a place and just like championing the place versus like we'll have people all over the world and kind of
Yeah.
mix each other.
Well, you know, at the risk of being the old guy in the room here, I think it's both, right? I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
you can't be 100% virtual. And if I would be really stupid to say, it has to be 100% in person, right? So obviously it's somewhere in the middle. It has to be both. Um, when the Build the Fort is kind of a philosophy or a mindset that we as adults overcomplicate almost everything we put our heads into.
That's true.
And the idea is, I want you to channel your inner 10-year-old and go back to like thinking how you build a fort as a kid, right? So the first book was about actually starting companies. The second book's about applying the Build the Fort mentality to building a community. And the idea here, Dan, is that everyone has a role to play in their community. And if you're not playing a role, kind of shame on you, not just as an entrepreneur, but as a member of your city and society and your community. A more robust, a more diverse economy that gives lots of room and supports entrepreneurs only makes your city's economy and what's happening and the infrastructure that much more special. So you have a duty to play a role, regardless of what you're doing. Now, what can that role be? You can be an entrepreneur, you can be an investor, you could be a mentor advisor, you could be working for the university, you could
Right.
be working for government, you could be at a corporation. Middle manager, you can be teaching people, you know, if you're a marketing maven, you could be teaching startups how to better market their stuff. If you're a CEO of a large corporation in the area, you could be putting money into a venture fund that helps the area. All of this kind of in this complex system that we call a startup ecosystem, everything makes a difference, but we need everyone kind of playing a role. And when you do that, by the way, this is exactly what Silicon Valley does really well and has been well oiled for years. When those things are all connected and supportive, and you know, in this case, and what the value is great for the with the mission of greed, right? Not greed, but like success. But when you do that, when you're connected and you're supporting, and everyone's playing their role and doing it in a very kind of net positive way, then really good shit happens, right?
Uh-huh.
And people stay, people build things, people try things, people know that they can't fail. You know, if they do fail, they'll go try it again or do it elsewhere, or you know, go work for the local corporation. The indirect benefits of this are so good for the area. And so the second book is really about what role everyone could play in that and why they should play that. And then how, most importantly, what are the things you could do tomorrow to actually help your community?
Yeah. I like the concept, build the fort. That's kind of like the army, right? Like you build a fort and I wasn't well, maybe like there's different perspectives. Like one is just to be defensible, right? Like when it comes to as a company, you have to play defense, not just sell. Like you gotta. Well,
Right.
I don't even want to get into that. Like where it's like you would, that can mean many things.
Yeah.
But when you say build a fort, that's just like build your tribe, right? Like build your building blocks, like your foundation, or does
It's
it?
building anything. So, I mean, you know, I've now written this book. I'm doing a
Uh,
lot of promotion, doing podcasts with very interesting people like present company. I'm meeting lots of people, which is awesome. My fort right now is to build a publishing and speaking,
Right.
business, right? I mean, I've been doing it for years. It's not like I'm really super building it, but in the context of build the fort, if you remember when you were 10 or 12 years old building a fort, whether it was an outside fort with wood that you
I use pillows.
bought, or inside with pillows and the chair upside down on the couch, right? Blankets over top, right? Maybe a broomstick holding the blanket up. Regardless of whether it's inside or outside, like you cobbled together pieces, right, to make something happen. And then you kind of improved on it, right? This iterative experimental. And it lasted a couple days and then you're off and then maybe you tore it down or maybe you did something else. The idea is whatever it is you're building, let's just take, and I outlined 5 lessons in that, but let's just kind of not think about, like, here's the adult version. Like, all right, so where'd you grow up?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. So your brother, sister, cousin, next door buddy said, you're 10 years old, right? It's the summer. And you say, Dan, you want to build a fort? And what do you say?
Where are we building it?
Yeah, like instantly, right? Yeah. It's like, yeah, wasn't even, yeah, was implied, right? Yeah, where we build it, how are we going to do it, right? Let's you and I do the adult version, right? So
Oh, here we go.
well,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So you asked me to build a fort.
Chris, do you want to build a fort with me?
Well, I don't know what kind of fort's it going to be, and where are we going to put it, and do we have enough wood or blankets, and will your mom let us do that, or is she going to get right? Like that's the adult thing. Like we find all these reasons, all the friction points.
Right.
Versus a 10, you're like, the heck with this. Let's just dive in and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm
I
trying to
love that,
push.
man. Yeah.
Just dive in and see where it goes because, it'll take a path. It'll take its easiest path and go have fun with it. And you'd be amazed at sometimes what comes out the back end.
No, that's a super important lesson. I think, even with like friends who are like, oh, I want to make this company, and then they're like, whoa, all this like jargon that
Yeah.
they don't really create anything, and then it's just they it's kind of funny if you apply compare it to like we're just 10-year-olds wanting to make
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Stop talking and go do something. Come to me
Yeah.
a couple days later after you have kind of the prototype or the shell, right? And then we can figure out how to make it better and go from
Do
there.
I think like there's like the concept of like innocence and maybe naiveness, which is okay, which I think like it's actually good to approach something with curiosity and fun and like enjoyment rather than how do we make thousands of dollars doing this, because but
Yeah.
I guess like adults, they need to care for themselves, have families, provide, do all X, Y, and Z. But like I think like yeah, just being able to bring your inner child out into a company is quite the valuable lesson that nobody really wants to admit.
And if you're in a company, as what we call more of an entrepreneur, have the platform by which I can express that without getting, crushed, right? To bring your inner child out and say, let's try something and see what happens. And,
Man, yeah.
and I love the word curiousness.
Uh-huh.
To bring a curiosity into this game, as opposed to the assumption that you already have to have all the answers when we all know no one has not
True.
only not all the answers, they probably don't have many, if not all of the answers. And yet they're trying to act like they have all the answers. Like that's that part of the adult thing that's like, I have to know. And it's like,
Yeah,
no,
man.
no, this is a curiosity discovery kind of thing.
What
So
why do you think that oh, I guess I think we both know why that is, but what some people, they're able to channel their innocence or like their like fun side where it's not business where it's where suits, let's like act professional, like
right.
there's like a there's like a I don't know, we don't want to call it emotional block or like a pain threshold because you feel like you're embarrassing yourself, right? But it's
Yeah.
all you're just having fun and not giving a damn.
Well, a lot of people give a damn,
Uh-huh.
right? Maybe, and it's not me and it's not you, but that's okay. That's why we're in the 10 to 15%, right? Um, no, I have no judgment against those people. In fact, there's some of the people we need to hire when it's time to scale the business, right? Because they're really
True.
good at that stuff. Um, but for us kind of rebels, disruptors, people who embrace the chaos instead of running away from it, the same, we gotta let our freak flag fly, right? Like
There
we
you
gotta we
go.
gotta have that we gotta have that room. And also I want to make sure is that if you were wired that way, like one of the most common questions I get asked are, Chris, are entrepreneurs, born or made?
Hmm.
And I think the answer is both. I think you have to have that DNA, that personality type, that brain function that we've just described multiple times, that like you're okay with being wrong. You're okay with, not being embarrassed, but you're okay with, not knowing the answers. You're okay with not wearing a suit, right? All these things. And if that's the case, then how do we become the best version of our entrepreneur? I want to make sure everyone who's wired that way has
Yeah.
an ability to express that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really important just because, the economy is affected by it. People's jobs, like you say, when somebody leaves a city, they kind of bring jobs with them, or they also bring, I guess, like their, you want to call it their personality or just the way of thinking. There's definitely many nodes to community or
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
nodes are good.
yeah, Chris, when you wrote the book, how did you go about writing a book? Because I think that'd be cool to talk about just because did you like self-publish it? As a who's got that entrepreneur background, did you find a publisher? What'd you do?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. So in both, I now have written two books. In both of them, I approached the same way. I wrote the book before I started talking to people about it,
Uh-huh.
because I didn't know whether I could actually do it. So I didn't want to get out ahead of myself. I told a few people for accountability reasons, but
Yeah, right.
so my style is I write a 6 to 8 page outline. I mean, it is detailed, right? And it's kind of the flow and it's all the pieces. And then I start writing all the pieces. I call it Frankenstein writing, right? So I get all these parts and I put them all together. And only when I've written all the parts in that outline do I go back and start to try to make something of it. In my first book, I got we went to go to the major publishers, and I found an agent, and she took me in to
Okay.
17 places, and they all said no.
Wow.
This
Really?
is this is
I
2014.
got rejected yesterday by a publisher too.
Yeah, and she's a major agent. She's like, I will have you a deal in 2 weeks, and so she was as surprised as me, and obviously disappointed. So she said, I have an idea. I've been wanting to do this, build my own imprint. Let's kind of hybrid publish. I'll build a little publishing label. I'll cover half the cost. You cover half the cost. We'll come up with a royalty deal that makes you happy for covering some of the costs. It was very low, thousands of dollars.
Uh-huh.
And we published the first book. You know, she designed the cover, did a little bit of editing. Life is good. Love her. She's a great friend today. For the second book, I'm like, okay, the one that we're talking about today about the Startup Community Builders Field Guide. I wanted a little more oomph. I still wasn't thinking I would go to a major publisher.
Right.
So I'm technically completely self-published, though I've paid a publishing services company an inordinate amount of money to really help me,
Yeah.
edit, structure edit, copy edit, design a cover, hardcovers, paperback, obviously Kindle version, and and really produce a much better book, and then also help me market it for the next 6 months. And so that's what I'm doing with this. The good news is I own complete
Royalty.
rights to
Right.
everything. I have 100% of the royalties. The bad news is I paid a significant amount of money to get myself there. Third book, be interesting to see. I literally just got off the phone from a major book publisher who I've known for years,
Oh, wow.
who wanted to ask me the same question you just asked me. Why did you think this? When you look at, he wants to
Uh-huh.
understand his business, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He wants to understand. So I don't know. I don't know what I'll do with the third one. So we'll
Man, yeah.
see.
Yeah, yeah. So you're writing a third one.
I got 3 or 4 lined up. And the question is just, energy and things. So we'll see what
No,
happens.
I agree. It's a pain in the butt.
I like the writing part. I'm not thrilled with the production part,
Yeah, right. Like it's
which
like
sounds like a 0 to 1 thing, doesn't
it does. I
it?
think yeah, yeah. I think it's compares and contrasts like the book and a company, or creating a company and writing a book. It's not too different, other than you're making a product which you
Yeah.
have to sell a lot of
Well,
to
and
be
here's the
successful.
difference between a major publisher, a co-publisher, or maybe a self-publisher is all the work is really about kind of getting out there and the marketing of it. And none of them do it really well. So, Dan,
Yeah.
I'm crafting and doing Twitter, 2-3
Yeah.
times. I'm doing
Yeah.
LinkedIn 2-3 times a week. I have an email database of 9,000 people this is going out to. I'm doing the email, crafting the emails.
Uh-huh.
I write blog posts every week, right? So like that's the marketing, right? That helps bring, and it's a long tail to sell a bunch of books. It's not,
Sure.
oh, it hits the New York Times and, you sell 10,000 copies. It's 50 here, it's 3 there, it's 100 here. So speaking, right? This is a
Sure.
business.
Sure.
So the
Sure.
book's just one piece of it, but ultimately you're responsible for your own marketing, I think.
Oh man, that's cool. Yeah, I've got a yeah. I think we should talk more about that in a different end. But as we're coming to
Yeah,
the end of the
I'd love
end of
to.
the end of the yeah. I'll grab your number. As we're coming into the end of the show, Chris, we typically ask the founders and people we bring on the show just random three questions we've always asked. And the first one is if you could give advice to Chris Heivly, a 20-year-old back in the day, what would you say?
uh Jump in sooner, don't be afraid, it's always going to work out.
I love that, man. And the next question is, if you could get dinner with like anyone in the world, who would that be? Or who would you want? Like a business dinner, like how Warren Buffett does that
Yeah.
Berkshire thing.
Is
He,
former President Obama count in
yeah,
that?
man. Yeah, that's a good
Because
answer.
he was a community guy before he was a politician.
Uh-huh.
So, he's like a community
Sorry.
activist in Chicago. So I'd love to not just, he just feels like such a cool guy, and he's so bright, and he's got a great sense of humor, and he loves, pop culture. But I also like to ask him what community building was like early in his career and how that manifested itself into politics.
Man, that's awesome. Last question, Chris, is what would you say your startup mindset is?
Well, at the risk of repeating some of the stuff we talked about, my mindset is it's a complete game of discovery. And if you can be curious and have this discovery mindset, you just might be lucky to kind of find gold.
Ah, I love that. That's amazing. Well, Chris, last part is how do people purchase your book or, is it work with Techstars or like anything like that?
Yeah. So I have a hardcover, paperback, and Kindle version available on Amazon. Just do a search for Build the Fort and Heivly. You'll see my first book, which is kind of how to start anything. And then you'll see the second book, the Start Community Builders Field Guide. I also have a website at heivly.com, spelled HEIV as in Victor, LY.com. By the way, anybody want to take 20 minutes? I have open office hours, a couple hours a
Cool.
week. We can talk about anything you want to talk about, 20 minutes. We'll obviously do it via Zoom. And then if there's something interesting there, I also have my website. If you have a question or, interested in, something other than the office hours, want me to come speak or do something crazy, just pop me an email.
All right, there you have it. Chris Hively, thank you so much, man. This is really great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Dan.